humanity had always been different. Across the stars, other civilizations whispered about the people from Earth, sometimes with admiration, often with fear. The term Deathworlders had been coined centuries ago, and it stuck, because humans had survived the impossible. Their home planet, a place of harsh climates, deadly predators, and ever-shifting natural disasters, had forged a species that could endure pain, adapt quickly, and think creatively in moments of crisis. Where other species might panic, humans learned to thrive under pressure, to turn disadvantage into opportunity. The galaxy had noticed, and over time, humanity gained a reputation, powerful, unpredictable, and not to be trifled with. But for the humans themselves, this reputation was less about pride and more about survival. They had no choice but to be what they were. Commander Rafe Collins understood this truth better than most. Born on a colony world far from Earth, Rafe had been raised on stories of his ancestors' resilience. His father had been a war veteran, his mother a scientist, and both had instilled in him a mixture of discipline, curiosity, and respect for life's fragility. From a young age, Rafe had learned that survival required more than strength. It required intelligence, courage, and a willingness to make decisions that others would shy away from. By the time he reached adulthood, he had already shown exceptional skill in both strategic thinking and leadership. He joined the Terran Expeditionary Defense Fleet, humanity's foremost military organization, and quickly rose through the ranks. To his peers, he was both respected and feared, a man who combined the cold logic of a commander with a rare understanding of the lives he was charged to protect. The Terran fleet itself was a marvel, built over decades with resources pooled from dozens of human colonies. It was a combination of technological brilliance and human ingenuity. Every ship was designed not only for combat but for adaptability. A single crew member might be tasked with piloting, repairing, and even negotiating in foreign languages, all in the span of one mission. Fleet tactics were a mixture of careful planning and improvisation, because humans knew that no two situations were ever alike. And yet, despite their advanced technology and fearsome combat capabilities, the fleet operated under a strict code: intervene only when necessary, protect the innocent whenever possible, and never underestimate the unpredictability of the universe. For centuries, humanity had maintained a cautious distance from other civilizations. Diplomatic envoys traveled to alien worlds, treaties were signed, and trade agreements were established. But human participation in galactic politics was always measured. They were respected, sometimes admired, but also distrusted. Many species regarded humans as volatile, capable of extraordinary acts of bravery or terrifying violence, often with little warning. Yet, the humans did not seek glory or conquest. They preferred to remain in the shadows, their true capabilities known only to those who had earned their trust, and this approach had served them well. Earth and its colonies had grown strong while avoiding unnecessary conflicts. Despite this reputation, or perhaps because of it, humans often found themselves called upon when others faced threats beyond their capacity to handle. The galaxy was not always peaceful. Pirates, warlords, and expansionist empires frequently attacked weaker civilizations, exploiting their lack of defense. Humans had the power to respond, and when they did, their intervention was decisive. A human fleet could dismantle an enemy armada with speed and precision, and the stories of these battles spread far and wide, further reinforcing the image of humanity as a species that could survive anything, but also exact a price for meddling in matters beyond their understanding. Rafe Collins lived with this weight daily. As commander of one of the fleet's most prestigious ships, the Resolute, he was responsible not only for the lives of his crew, but also for the outcome of missions that could influence entire systems. He was meticulous in planning exercises, drills, and strategic reviews, knowing that a single misstep could lead to catastrophe. At the same time, he was deeply aware that human survival depended on more than tactics. It required empathy, understanding, and sometimes intuition. He spent hours studying alien cultures, communication styles, and technology, trying to anticipate not only what might happen in battle but also how others might perceive humanity's actions. The galaxy was watching, and Rafe could not afford mistakes. The crew of the Resolute reflected humanity's diverse strengths: engineers who could repurpose damaged ship systems in minutes, medics capable of saving lives under impossible conditions, pilots who could maneuver through asteroid fields that would destroy even the most advanced vessels. The crew was a microcosm of human adaptability. Many of them had grown up on harsh colonies, learning to survive in environments that tested every skill they had. Others were scientists, diplomats, or tacticians, each bringing a unique perspective to the ship. Together, they formed a unit that was more than the sum of its parts. They trusted each other implicitly, because trust was survival, and under Rafe's leadership, they had faced numerous crises, from natural disasters on human colonies to hostile encounters with alien raiders. Each challenge had honed their abilities, strengthened their resolve, and deepened their bond as a crew. Humanity's reputation, however, was not built on victories alone. It was also forged through moral choices. In countless conflicts, humans had demonstrated a willingness to protect those who could not defend themselves, even when doing so carried immense risk. Stories circulated across the galaxy of human ships arriving in devastated systems, shielding civilians from annihilation, and engaging enemies that far outnumbered them. These actions earned humanity both admiration and fear. To some, they were saviors. To others, monsters capable of unimaginable destruction if provoked. This duality defined human presence in space, respected, feared, and often misunderstood, but always impossible to ignore. Despite their fearsome image, humans were not invincible. They faced constant threats, both internal and external. Political tensions within human colonies could flare into conflict. Supply lines could be disrupted across light years, and alien adversaries were always evolving. Rafe and his fellow commanders knew that complacency was fatal. Every mission required preparation. Every decision demanded careful thought, and every action carried consequences. Yet, this constant vigilance also made humans resilient. They had learned to expect the unexpected, to adapt quickly, and to find solutions where others saw only doom. In the quiet moments aboard the Resolute, Rafe often reflected on humanity's place in the galaxy. He thought about Earth, a blue and green planet that seemed fragile against the vastness of space, yet had produced a species capable of extraordinary feats. He thought about the colonies scattered across multiple star systems, each struggling to survive in harsh environments while contributing to the collective strength of humanity. And he thought about the galaxy itself, filled with civilizations of all kinds, each with their own ambitions, fears, and weaknesses. Humanity had carved out its niche not through domination, but through adaptability, courage, and a willingness to act when others hesitated. These reflections were interrupted regularly by alerts, reports, and communications. The life of a fleet commander was one of constant attention. Every signal could indicate a new threat, a call for assistance, or an opportunity for diplomacy. Humans had learned to act decisively, because hesitation could be deadly. Rafe trained his mind as much as his body, practicing strategic thinking, leadership exercises, and even simulations of alien interactions. His goal was always the same: ensure that when humanity acted, they acted effectively, ethically, and decisively. While humans were known for their resilience and tactical skill, they were also remarkable for their unpredictability. Where other species relied heavily on rigid protocols or established hierarchies, humans were willing to improvise, to take risks, and to act creatively. This made them formidable in conflict, but it also made other civilizations wary. The combination of skill, adaptability, and moral judgment meant that humans could be both saviors and destroyers, often in ways that were difficult for outsiders to anticipate. This unpredictability reinforced the Deathworlder image, but it also underscored a deeper truth. Humanity's strength was not just in power, but in ingenuity and character. Rafe understood that reputation alone was not enough. It could open doors, but it could also attract danger. Humanity had enemies, some obvious, some hidden, who viewed their strength as a threat. Navigating this complex web of relationships required diplomacy, intelligence, and sometimes subtle displays of power. The humans had learned to balance these elements carefully, showing strength without arrogance, compassion without weakness, and decisiveness without cruelty. It was a delicate balance, one that required constant vigilance and constant reflection as the Resolute drifted silently through the stars. Rafe's thoughts turned to the broader picture. The galaxy was vast, filled with both wonders and dangers. Humanity had survived by embracing both, learning to adapt, to endure, and to protect. They had faced countless challenges, from hostile environments to aggressive species, and each challenge had made them stronger. And yet, Rafe knew that survival was only part of the story. Humanity's true test was not just to endure, but to act when needed, to respond to cries for help, and to uphold the values that had allowed them to thrive. It was in this context that humanity's reputation as Deathworlders took on deeper meaning. It was not just a label. It was a reflection of a species forged by adversity, tempered by experience, and guided by a sense of responsibility. Humans had the power to change outcomes, to protect civilizations on the brink of destruction, and to shape the course of galactic events. This power came with consequences, but also with opportunity. And for Rafe Collins and the crew of the Resolute, it was a responsibility they carried with pride, humility, and unwavering commitment. In the end, the humans aboard the Resolute were not defined solely by their fearsome abilities or their reputation. They were defined by their choices, their courage, and their willingness to act in the face of uncertainty. The galaxy had learned to respect, fear, and sometimes admire them. But for those humans themselves, the focus was simple: survive, protect, and uphold the values that had carried their species from a fragile homeworld to the stars. And as they traveled through the vast expanse of space, always alert to the next challenge, they knew that their story was far from over. The true test of humanity, they understood, was not just in survival, but in how they chose to wield their strength when the universe cried out for help. The peaceful expanse of space rarely remained peaceful for long. Humans had grown accustomed to it, yet every new signal brought a mix of caution and curiosity. It was during one of these routine patrols that the Resolute detected something unusual. A faint transmission had crossed their path, barely audible against the static of the void. At first it seemed insignificant, a garbled, broken signal that might have come from a drifting cargo ship or a malfunctioning probe. But Commander Rafe Collins had trained his instincts to notice even the smallest irregularity. There was a subtle undertone in the message, something that set his senses on high alert. Fear. Pure, unfiltered fear. Humans were familiar with fear in battle, with threats they could analyze and prepare for, but this was different. This was desperation. The signal's source was traced to a star system far beyond the territories usually patrolled by humanity. The coordinates led to a lush, vibrant planet orbiting a sun of pale gold. According to the galactic charts, the planet was inhabited by a species called the Varelians. The humans had records of them peaceful, intellectual, and technologically advanced in certain areas, but they had never been considered militarily significant. The Varelians had no standing army to speak of. Their defenses were mostly symbolic, bureaucratic, or designed to deter small-scale threats like pirates, not full-scale invasions. Yet the signal made it clear that something had gone horribly wrong. The first officer, Lieutenant Celine Arkov, sat in the command chair beside Rafe, her hands flying across the control panels as she worked to enhance the transmission. The voices grew clearer, though still fragmented, and each word sent chills through the room. Help attacking. Cannot survive. They will destroy all of us. Please help. The desperation was palpable. Even the most battle-hardened crew members felt a weight settle over them, an instinctive understanding that this was not a situation where anyone could be safely ignored. Rafe's eyes narrowed as he processed the data. The Varelians were facing an enemy unlike anything humans had previously encountered in their records. The aggressors, later identified through satellite scans as the Jaka Dominion, were merciless, expansionist, and technologically advanced. They moved with precision, striking quickly and without warning. They did not negotiate, and they did not retreat. The evidence suggested they were systematically dismantling the Varelian society, targeting key infrastructure, communication centers, and leadership structures. Their approach was calculated, designed not only to conquer but to instill terror. Rafe understood that if the Terran fleet did not intervene quickly, the Varelians could face complete annihilation within days. The council aboard the Resolute convened immediately. Rafe's strategy team gathered around the holographic display, reviewing every scrap of intelligence they could gather. They discussed possible approaches, immediate intervention, surveillance, sending a warning, or waiting to assess the enemy's next move. Each option carried risks. Intervening meant entering a war in a system they had no treaty obligations to defend. There was no guarantee of success, and a failed intervention could escalate into a larger galactic conflict. On the other hand, inaction would guarantee the destruction of an entire civilization. It was a moral and strategic dilemma that weighed heavily on Rafe. Despite the risks, the decision was clear in his mind. The Varelians had made a desperate plea, reaching out across the void to the species they feared most. Humans feared across the galaxy for their toughness, had the ability to change the outcome. For Rafe and his crew, it was no longer a question of politics or protocol, it was a matter of responsibility. Humanity's strength was not just in survival or combat skill, it was in the choices they made when others could not act. Ignoring the call would go against everything they represented. Preparations began immediately. The Resolute adjusted its course, heading toward the Varelian system at maximum sublight velocity while maintaining stealth to avoid alerting enemy forces prematurely. Every department was engaged, weapons systems were calibrated, shields reinforced, and escape protocols reviewed. The engineers ran simulations of potential encounters, testing responses to ambushes, orbital bombardments, and boarding attempts. The medics prepared for mass casualties, while communications officers worked to decode further messages from the beleaguered Varel. Each member of the crew understood the stakes. This was not a drill, nor a routine mission. Lives were on the line, and the outcome rested on their collective skill and judgment. As the fleet approached, more disturbing intelligence arrived. Sensors detected signs of widespread destruction across multiple orbital platforms. Satellites and communication relays were either destroyed or actively targeted. The Varelian cities, once known for their architectural elegance and scientific achievements, were now shrouded in smoke and fire. The scale of the attack was unprecedented in human experience. Rafe realized that the Jaka were not just attacking, they were committing an organized campaign of annihilation. The Varelians had no means to resist effectively. The odds were overwhelmingly against them. Rafe called a briefing for the senior staff. Standing in front of the holographic map of the Varelian system, he outlined the situation. "They are efficient, brutal, and relentless," he said, his voice calm but firm. "They will destroy everything if we hesitate. Our role is clear. We move in, protect the civilians, and neutralize the enemy as effectively as possible. Every decision must be deliberate, every action coordinated. We have one chance to make a difference." His words were met with solemn nods. The crew understood not only the danger but also the moral imperative. They were humanity's best, and now they were the galaxy's hope for an innocent species facing extinction. The Varelians themselves had little idea of what was coming. Most had never seen a human ship in person, and their perception of humans was shaped by distant stories and rumors. To them, the very idea that the feared Deathworlders might answer their call seemed impossible. Their fear, however, was matched by a glimmer of hope. The first human ship detected in the system sparked a mixture of awe and disbelief. Humans, despite their terrifying reputation, represented a lifeline, a chance to survive the merciless onslaught of the HFY War. As the fleet entered Varelian space, tension reached its peak. Every sensor scan, every transmission, every visual confirmed the scale of the disaster. Debris floated in orbit, orbital stations were ablaze, and automated defense drones were inoperative or destroyed. The HFY had positioned themselves strategically, blocking potential evacuation routes and cutting off communications. The situation was worse than even the initial transmission had indicated. The humans now faced a challenge that tested not only their combat ability but their problem-solving under extreme pressure. Every decision, every maneuver, could mean the difference between life and death for thousands of Varelians. The moral weight of the mission was palpable. Rafe walked the length of the command deck, observing his crew as they prepared. Some had served in battles before, yet the scale of this situation was unlike anything they had encountered. The fear in the Varelian messages resonated through the crew, but so did determination. They were humans, trained to survive, to adapt, and to act decisively. They had faced adversity before, but this mission carried an added weight, the responsibility to protect a species entirely unfamiliar to them, one that had reached out in desperation. As the Resolute and its supporting ships drew closer, initial contact with the Varelians was established. Communication was fragmented, as their systems had been partially destroyed, but enough messages got through to understand the immediate dangers. The Varelians were trapped in key population centers, unable to evacuate effectively, and desperate to organize any form of resistance. Rafe's team quickly assessed the situation. Civilian safety had to be the priority. Every tactical decision had to account for the presence of thousands of innocents, while still neutralizing the HFY threat. The first steps of engagement were delicate. Human ships moved into strategic positions, using stealth and precision to shield civilian evacuation points. The Varelians watched in awe as the human fleet executed maneuvers that were calculated yet fluid, combining technology and instinct in ways they had never witnessed. For the first time, they realized that the species they feared most might be their savior. The human presence alone began to disrupt the HFY plans, forcing the enemy to divert resources and rethink strategies. This brief but critical window was humanity's advantage, and Rafe knew they had to use it wisely. Even with the humans' arrival, the danger was far from over. The HFY were ruthless and unpredictable, capable of devastating strikes at any moment. Every decision made by Rafe and his crew had to be measured, as mistakes could result in catastrophic losses. The tension on the command deck was thick, a mix of fear, anticipation, and unwavering focus. Crew members ran through simulations again and again, mentally preparing for every possible contingency. They were aware that they were facing a force that had never encountered human ingenuity in full. The advantage lay not only in firepower but in strategy, adaptability, and the ability to exploit the enemy's assumptions. As the first skirmishes approached, Rafe reviewed the moral and strategic imperatives with his team. He emphasized that the mission was not just about defeating the HFY, it was about protecting life, minimizing destruction, and demonstrating that humanity's strength came with responsibility. The crew absorbed his words, internalizing the delicate balance between aggression and protection. The Varelians, unaware of the precise tactics being employed, began to regain hope. Their belief that they might survive the onslaught grew, fueled by the presence of humans who were willing to risk everything for them. The rising challenge, then, was both external and internal. Externally, the HFY threat was immense, requiring tactical brilliance and adaptability. Internally, the crew of the Resolute faced the pressure of making split-second decisions with lives at stake, all while navigating the moral complexity of intervention. Every action mattered. Every calculation, every maneuver, and every choice carried weight. Humanity had arrived not only as warriors but as protectors, and the outcome of this encounter would define the fates of the Varelians, and potentially the reputation of humans across the galaxy. The human fleet entered Varelian space with a quiet precision that belied the storm brewing ahead. The first glimpses of the HFY forces were visible on long-range sensors, warships glinting coldly in the light of distant suns, their formations tight, their movements coordinated with lethal efficiency. Unlike humans, who adapted quickly and improvised in the chaos of battle, the HFY operated with rigid precision. Every vessel had a role, every maneuver followed a pattern, and their aggressiveness was fueled by an almost animalistic hunger for conquest. To the Varelians who watched from their battered orbital platforms, the sight was terrifying. But to humans, this was a challenge, a test of adaptability, strategy, and courage. Commander Rafe Collins stood on the bridge of the Resolute, surveying the battlefield. He had spent hours in simulations, calculated odds, and studied enemy tactics, but nothing could fully prepare him for the scale of devastation unfolding before him. Multiple orbital cities were in flames. Communication networks were fractured, leaving pockets of Varelians isolated and vulnerable. Rescue operations were ongoing, but the enemy was relentless. Civilians fled toward escape pods and evacuation zones, their hope pinned on ships that were their only chance at survival. Rafe knew the first moments of engagement would be decisive. If the humans faltered, thousands, possibly millions, could perish. He issued his first orders with measured precision. All ships, shields at maximum. Maintain formation around civilian zones. No unauthorized engagements. Protect life first. Weapons only on hostile targets. The voice of authority carried through the command deck, calm and steady, even as tension mounted. Every officer and crew member understood the stakes. They were trained for war, but this mission carried a weight beyond mere strategy. Every life saved was a victory. Every misstep a tragedy. The first encounter came swiftly. Joker frigates surged toward the Varelian evacuation zones, firing with deadly accuracy. Their energy beams cut through orbital debris, igniting fires that threatened to consume entire cities. Human pilots, relying on instincts honed through decades of survival on harsh worlds, executed maneuvers that bent the limits of physics. Ships darted between burning debris, weaving through a deadly ballet of fire and metal. The Varelians, untrained in warfare, watched in awe and disbelief as humans, feared across the galaxy, shielded them from annihilation. Despite their skill, the battle quickly escalated into chaos. The Jaka were not merely attacking, they were adapting to human strategies. When the Terran fleet positioned itself to block a line of assault, the enemy responded by splitting into multiple vectors, attempting to flank and overwhelm. Rafe's mind raced, calculating responses while accounting for civilian locations, shield capacities, and energy reserves. Every second counted, and every decision could mean life or death. One of the first critical moments came when a massive Joker cruiser targeted a Varelian hospital station in orbit. The station housed hundreds of civilians, including injured survivors from prior strikes. Its destruction would have been catastrophic. Rafe, recognizing the imminent threat, ordered a high-risk maneuver, a direct intercept of the cruiser by the Resolute. While smaller escort ships engaged the cruiser's defense drones, the move was daring. The Resolute would absorb heavy fire to shield the hospital, but the risk of damage to the flagship was enormous. The crew moved with practiced precision, executing orders flawlessly. Within moments, the cruiser's weapons were distracted, and the hospital station remained intact, its people safe. But the cost was already apparent. The Resolute had sustained damage to its outer hull, and some shield nodes were critically stressed. Even as the immediate threat was neutralized, the Joker escalated further. Boarding ships were deployed, small but deadly craft designed to infiltrate and sabotage human vessels. The bridge erupted into controlled chaos as security teams prepared to repel boarders. Automated turrets rotated into position, and human marines donned armor, ready to defend their ship at any cost. Rafe maintained composure, coordinating defensive measures while still directing offensive strikes elsewhere. The human fleet was stretched thin, but cohesion and discipline held them together. Every crew member understood that hesitation could mean disaster. At the same time, the human fleet's advanced sensors detected subtle weaknesses in the Joker formation. While their coordination was impressive, they relied heavily on pre-programmed attack patterns and rigid hierarchies. Rafe realized that if the humans could exploit these tendencies, they could turn the tide, even while outnumbered. Orders were given to execute a series of feints and sudden maneuvers, designed to draw enemy ships into disadvantageous positions. The strategy was risky. If miscalculated, it could leave civilian zones exposed, but the crew trusted Rafe's judgment implicitly. As the battle intensified, the human fleet demonstrated another critical advantage: improvisation. While the Joker followed predictable patterns, humans adapted to every unexpected variable. When a previously uncharted asteroid field was used by the enemy as cover for an ambush, human pilots rerouted, turning the field into a trap rather than a threat. Explosions of enemy ships echoed through space, but the civilians remained protected under the human shields. The Varelians, watching from their escape pods and orbital stations, began to believe that survival was possible, even against such overwhelming odds. One of the most tense moments occurred when a Joker capital ship appeared unexpectedly. Far larger and more heavily armed than any previously engaged, it had the potential to devastate the human fleet if allowed to engage fully. Rafe assessed options quickly. Direct engagement would risk significant losses, but allowing it to strike civilians was unacceptable. He made a decision that relied on both strategy and instinct. The Resolute and two escort ships would draw the capital ship into a preset kill zone, while the rest of the fleet executed precision strikes to disable its weapon systems. The maneuver required split-second timing and flawless coordination. The plan was executed. Human ships danced through the void, weaving between enemy fire and debris. The capital ship's weapons targeted the Resolute, its energy beams tearing through nearby asteroid fragments. For moments it seemed impossible that the human fleet could succeed. Then, in a coordinated strike, the kill zone was triggered. Concentrated energy blasts from multiple ships struck the capital ship's critical points, disabling its weapons and propulsion. The Joker formation faltered, confusion rippling through their ranks. This was the turning point, the critical moment where the battle could swing in favor of humanity, but only if the humans maintained their discipline and coordination. Despite the success, the danger was far from over. Smaller Xhaka fighters continued to harass civilians, and boarding threats persisted. Damage reports came in continuously, highlighting the strain on the human fleet's shields and hulls. Every crew member faced exhaustion, stress, and a psychological weight of watching innocent lives hang in the balance. Yet, amid the chaos, a profound sense of purpose unified them. They were not merely fighting for survival, they were fighting to protect life itself. Rafe coordinated with the Varelian leaders as best he could. Given the fragmented communications, he instructed them on emergency evacuations, temporary shelter placements, and the best routes to avoid ongoing attacks. The Varelians, many of whom had never experienced warfare firsthand, followed these instructions with remarkable discipline. Their cooperation amplified the humans' effectiveness, proving that even untrained populations could make a difference when guided by expertise and calm leadership. Hours into the battle, the Resolute sustained a near-critical hit to its main shield generator. Sparks flew along the command deck, alarms blared, and the bridge shook under the impact of enemy fire. Rafe remained composed, issuing precise orders to redistribute shield power, coordinate repair teams, and continue defensive operations. The crew responded flawlessly, executing emergency protocols that minimized damage and kept the flagship operational. This was the essence of the human advantage, the ability to adapt in real time, to improvise solutions under extreme pressure, and to maintain focus when others would panic. The escalation reached its peak when the Xhaka attempted a final, concentrated strike aimed at the largest evacuation hub. Hundreds of escape pods, carrying thousands of Aurelians, were in immediate danger. Rafe made a split-second decision. The Resolute would act as a living shield, absorbing the brunt of the attack while escort ships intercepted the most dangerous projectiles. The human flagship endured heavy damage, but the civilians were shielded. Explosions lit the darkness of space, hull plating warped under pressure, and energy conduits sparked along corridors. But the critical objective was achieved. The evacuation hub remained intact, and the Varelians continued to flee toward safety. The Xhaka were beginning to falter. Their disciplined formations had been disrupted by the humans' unpredictability and tactical improvisation. Confusion spread through the enemy fleet, giving the humans an opening. Rafe knew that the next phase of the engagement would be decisive. The critical moment was not over that humans had survived the brunt of the assault, but the opportunity to turn the tide was fleeting. One wrong move could undo all their efforts. Every crew member, every pilot, every weapons operator understood this implicitly. Even amid the chaos, Rafe considered the broader implications. The Varelians' survival depended not only on human combat prowess but also on leadership, coordination, and the ability to inspire hope. The humans were not merciless warriors seeking conquest. They were protectors, acting in a calculated yet humane manner. This distinction mattered. The Varelians needed more than survival. They needed assurance that life could continue, that the horrors they had witnessed would not define their civilization. Humanity's actions were shaping not only the immediate battle but also the perception of hope, resilience, and morality in a species unaccustomed to warfare. By the time the critical moment passed, the Xhaka fleet had suffered significant losses, confusion, and disruption. The humans, though heavily strained and damaged, had maintained cohesion, protected civilians, and demonstrated their unique blend of adaptability, discipline, and moral clarity. The Varelians had survived a moment that seemed impossible for Commander Rafe Collins and the crew of the Resolute. This phase of the battle was a testament to human ingenuity, courage, and determination. They had faced overwhelming odds, confronted the full force of a merciless enemy, and emerged not only intact but victorious in the crucial objective, saving lives. After the critical moments of the battle, the Resolute and its supporting human ships faced a new challenge, turning the chaos into decisive victory. The Xhaka fleet, though still formidable, had shown signs of confusion. Their carefully structured formations had collapsed under the relentless adaptability of the human fleet. Sensors detected scattered enemy vessels, some retreating, some damaged, and some attempting to regroup. Commander Rafe Collins understood that hesitation could allow the Xhaka to recover and resume their assault, potentially undoing all the hard work the humans had done to protect the next moves had to be swift, precise, and calculated. Rafe gathered his senior officers on the command deck. They were tired, many with hours of continuous battle operations behind them, but their minds were sharp. "The enemy is disorganized," Rafe began, pointing to the holographic display of the system. "We've created the opening we need. Our mission now is twofold: secure all civilian zones and neutralize the remaining Xhaka ships before they can escape or regroup. We will act decisively, but we must avoid unnecessary destruction of Varelian infrastructure. Every life saved is a victory." The crew responded with a mixture of determination and exhaustion. They had survived the critical moments of the battle, but the real test ending it efficiently while protecting the innocent was only beginning. The first phase of the resolution involved protecting the remaining evacuation corridors. Smaller human strike groups were dispatched to intercept pockets of enemy fighters attempting to ambush fleeing Varelian ships. These missions required perfect coordination and timing. Pilots had to anticipate enemy maneuvers while avoiding collision with debris from destroyed ships and orbital installations. The human crews excelled in this chaos, moving as a unified force while each individual adjusted to the immediate threats. By maintaining control of key evacuation points, the humans ensured that thousands of Varelians could escape to safety without interruption. While evacuation zones were secured, Rafe focused on eliminating the remaining Joker threats. He identified a cluster of heavily armed cruisers attempting to retreat through a nearby asteroid field. These vessels were dangerous, capable of devastating counterattacks, but the terrain offered an opportunity. Rafe devised a high-risk strategy. Human ships would lure the cruisers deeper into the field, forcing them to navigate the dense asteroids under fire. The cruisers, unable to adapt quickly, became vulnerable to precision strikes from human torpedoes and energy weapons. It was a delicate operation. Any miscalculation could allow the enemy to escape or destroy human ships. Execution of the plan began. The human fleet feigned a retreat, baiting the Joker cruisers into the asteroid field. Sensors monitored every movement, predicting paths and calculating optimal firing windows. The Joker, confident in their numerical superiority and technology, fell for the tactic. As they moved into the dense cluster of asteroids, human strike teams unleashed coordinated attacks. Torpedoes weaved through the rocks with precision, striking critical points on the enemy vessels. Energy beams targeted propulsion systems, disabling escape capabilities. Within moments, several cruisers were immobilized, others destroyed, and the remaining enemy forces scattered. The success of this maneuver demonstrated humanity's unique combination of adaptability, strategy, and daring traits that the Joker had underestimated. Meanwhile, the Resolute continued to serve as a shield and command center. Its crew coordinated multiple operations simultaneously, monitoring civilian evacuations, tracking enemy movements, and directing firepower to critical points. Medics aboard the flagship and support ships worked tirelessly to treat injured Varelians. Some were victims of the initial attacks, burned or wounded while fleeing their homes. Others had suffered exposure during chaotic evacuations. Human medical teams demonstrated remarkable efficiency, stabilizing patients under difficult conditions, and ensuring that the Varelians had the care necessary to survive until they could reach safe locations. As the day progressed, the remaining Joker resistance was concentrated into smaller groups, increasingly desperate and disorganized. Without cohesive leadership, their attacks became sporadic and predictable. Human forces exploited this, systematically isolating enemy ships and neutralizing them one by one. Even the largest remaining vessels were targeted with precision strikes designed to disable rather than destroy when possible. Rafe's goal was clear: end the engagement decisively, protect the civilians, and demonstrate the human commitment to preserving life even in the chaos of war. A turning point came when intelligence indicated the presence of the Joker command ship, the vessel coordinating attacks across the system. Its destruction was essential to ending hostilities completely. The ship was heavily armored and shielded, designed to withstand prolonged assault. Rafe realized that a direct frontal attack would be suicidal. Instead, he devised a multi-pronged approach. Smaller teams would disable its escort ships and shields, while the Resolute and several strike vessels executed a high-speed flanking maneuver to strike the command ship's critical systems. Timing, coordination, and flawless execution were paramount. The operation commenced. Strike teams moved with fluid precision, targeting escort ships and creating openings in the enemy's defensive perimeter. Energy beams, missiles, and torpedoes found their marks, neutralizing opposition with minimal collateral damage. Human ships, utilizing superior maneuvering and real-time adaptability, avoided the command ship's defensive fire. Then, at the optimal moment, the Resolute led the flanking strike, striking key control nodes and disabling primary weapon arrays. Sparks and explosions erupted across the enemy vessel as systems failed one by one. Within minutes, the Joker command ship was rendered inoperative, its crew either captured or fleeing. With its destruction, coordinated resistance across the system collapsed. The aftermath of this decisive action was immediate. Remaining Joker ships, leaderless and demoralized, attempted to retreat through hyperspace, but human interception protocols ensured that none could escape. Smaller pockets of enemy resistance were systematically cleared, and the Varelian system gradually stabilized. The human fleet had transformed the battle from near disaster to controlled resolution. The lives of thousands of Varelians had been preserved, and critical infrastructure, though damaged, remained intact enough to support recovery efforts during this period. The humans also focused on repairing and stabilizing the Varelian population centers. Teams of engineers, scientists, and logistics officers worked alongside Varelian personnel to restore basic utilities, communication systems, and emergency facilities. The Varelians, inexperienced in handling such large-scale crises, relied heavily on human guidance. They marveled at the efficiency, discipline, and dedication of the human teams. Despite exhaustion, humans worked tirelessly, understanding that the success of the mission depended not only on ending the battle but also on creating conditions for survival and recovery. In the command center, Rafe monitored every operation, issuing instructions, coordinating teams, and ensuring the smooth execution of post-battle procedures. He understood that victory in combat alone was insufficient. Humanity's responsibility extended to the people they had sworn to protect. The Varelians, observing human actions, began to understand a profound truth. These were not mindless warriors, as legends suggested, but a species capable of empathy, intelligence, and unwavering moral judgment even in the midst of war. As the hours passed, it became clear that the Xhaka threat had been neutralized. The human fleet had inflicted significant damage on enemy capabilities while minimizing civilian casualties. Evacuation corridors were secure, medical treatment was underway, and essential services were being restored. The Varelian leadership, previously fragmented and demoralized, began coordinating with humans to establish safe zones, allocate resources, and stabilize the population. Humanity's presence had shifted the balance entirely. The invaders were repelled, and the innocents were safe. The final acts of resolution involved ensuring that no hidden threats remained. Human teams patrolled orbital zones, scanning for escape pods carrying rogue enemy elements, disabled warships drifting in dangerous trajectories, and automated weapon systems that could still pose a hazard. Engineers deactivated mines and traps left behind by the Xhaka, preventing further harm to civilians. Every precaution was taken to prevent the resurgence of hostilities. Even after the immediate battle ended, humans maintained vigilance, understanding that the consequences of oversight could be catastrophic. Throughout this phase, the Varelians observed the humans closely. Their initial fear and mistrust slowly transformed into awe and gratitude. They witnessed acts of courage, precision, and moral clarity that contradicted every stereotype they had been told about the feared death. Humans had arrived in their darkest hour, faced overwhelming odds, and emerged victorious not through reckless aggression, but through intelligence, coordination, and care for life. For the Vir, this was a revelation. The most feared species in the galaxy had chosen to protect them rather than exploit their vulnerability. Rafe and his officers took a moment to reflect on the magnitude of their success. Though the battle had been brutal and losses sustained on both sides, the primary objective had been achieved. Thousands of lives were saved, critical infrastructure was preserved, and the Xhaka forces were effectively neutralized. The crew understood that this mission would be remembered not only as a tactical victory but as an example of humanity's unique blend of skill, courage, and ethical responsibility. By the time the human fleet prepared to depart the Varelian system, the situation was stable. Civilians had been evacuated to secure locations. Remaining Xhaka elements were monitored or captured, and recovery operations were underway. The Varelians, still in shock from the violence they had endured, began to rebuild with guidance from human teams. For Rafe and his crew, the mission was far from over, but the resolution of the immediate threat marked a turning point. They had not only defeated the enemy but also demonstrated the true value of their presence, protection, survival, and hope. In the quiet aftermath, Rafe walked the length of the command deck, observing the exhausted but determined crew. Every department had played a role in securing this victory, and every crew member had performed beyond expectation. Engineers patched hull breaches, medics treated the last of the injured, and communications officers relayed final status reports to Varelian authorities. The weight of what had been accomplished settled over the crew, a mixture of relief, pride, and humility. They had succeeded in a task that seemed impossible, and the lives saved would forever mark the significance of their actions. The resolution of this battle illustrated the strengths of humanity in the galaxy: adaptability, strategic brilliance, courage under fire, and a steadfast moral compass. They had turned near-certain disaster into a controlled and decisive victory. The Varelians would never forget the humans who had appeared in their darkest hour, and the humans themselves had reinforced the principles that had guided their species for centuries: protect life, act decisively, and never underestimate the power of ingenuity and determination. The battle had ended, yet the echoes of conflict lingered across the Varelian system. Smoke still rose from orbital stations, fires smoldered in the ruins of cities, and the once vibrant planet bore scars from the Xhaka invasion. The human fleet, though battered and damaged, maintained formation above the planet, ensuring no remaining enemy elements could regroup or threaten the survivors. Commander Rafe Collins walked the length of the Resolute, moving between the command deck, engineering bays, and medical wards, observing the aftermath of what had been an extraordinary operation. The crew, weary from hours of near-continuous battle, moved with quiet determination, aware that their mission had not fully ended until every civilian was safe and every danger neutralized. Rafe reflected on the enormity of the situation. Thousands of Varelians had been saved, countless lives preserved by the strategic brilliance, courage, and adaptability of humanity. Yet the battle had not been without cost. The Resolute bore damage to its shields and outer hull, and several support vessels required extensive repairs. Crew members had suffered injuries both minor and serious, and some would carry the psychological weight of the intense combat for years to come. Despite this, there was an undeniable sense of accomplishment. Humanity had intervened decisively at a moment when others would have hesitated, demonstrating the unique qualities that had earned them the reputation of Deathworlders: resilience, ingenuity, and moral resolve. The still reeling from the trauma of the invasion, began tentative efforts to rebuild their society. Human engineers and logistics officers worked alongside local officials to restore power grids, communication networks, and transportation routes. Hospitals were stabilized, emergency shelters reinforced, and supplies distributed to communities that had been cut off during the attacks. While the Varelians were intelligent and capable, they lacked experience in managing large-scale crises, particularly one involving a hostile and technologically advanced invader. The humans provided guidance, organization, and expertise, ensuring that recovery was not merely possible but sustainable. Interactions between humans and Varelians were initially cautious. Many Varelians had heard of humans only through distant rumors, some describing them as violent and unpredictable. Witnessing the human fleet's intervention firsthand challenged these preconceived notions. Humans had arrived not as conquerors, but as protectors, risking their own lives to safeguard an alien civilization they had no obligation to defend. Varelian leaders, once fractured and overwhelmed, began to see humanity as both an ally and a model for resilience. This recognition fostered a sense of gratitude and trust that would shape the relationship between the two species for generations.